Welcome to the Cannon Curve for July 2020. I'm your host, Phil Buchanan. This month on the Cannon Curve, I have the privilege to sit down with wealth management thought leader, innovator, execution consultant, entrepreneur, and investor, Steve Gresham. Steve has a very distinct look on leadership and lives out the quote-unquote in the trenches leadership model. He'll share that perspective with you. Steve is a man who's navigated the trials and tribulations of large corporate America, the optimism and frustration of numerous startups, and the necessary diplomacy and herding cats mentality of leading industry peer groups. He is currently putting his energy and efforts in multiple areas to better the financial services industry. Listen in to learn what he is currently working on and his why, as well as to gain valuable insight and perspectives from him. I know you'll enjoy the podcast.
Excited to have you part of the Cannon Curve this month. You know, you and I have been, I've been fortunate to have very in-depth conversations with you to gain some perspectives on your insight about what's going on in the world of financial services, post-pandemic, where it was pre-pandemic. But one of the things that came across very clearly in our first communique is you've got a very distinctive look on leadership and the role and responsibilities leaders take on in organizations. I think our business schools do a great job teaching management principles. I don't know sometimes if our business schools do as good of a job of leadership development. Take us back through your narrative and your story. What were the most influential principles that you ultimately developed your own leadership?
Thank you, Phil, and it's terrific to be here with you. The the management style that I've acquired, or as you put it, leadership style, is really one of taking it from the other side. Apparently, as a young child, I had a bit of an issue with authority that has continued on, and so, but we have to have a guide from somewhere. And I guess I was very fortunate very early on in my life to understand through the eyes and the lives of my parents who were in public health, and in my grandfather who was an academic university president, that you actually get with the people and you learn who's really in charge. So my life was not so much about understanding authority or leadership from that perspective, but it was to have respect for the leadership created by the actual people that you were trying to engage with and to serve. So, you know, when I had my first headquarters job after selling my advisory book in the late 1980s, I arrived into the headquarters with the admonition that if I could do what I did in the field, then anybody could do it. So how about that for, you know, an extra 2 cents for the new guy? And it was interesting when I got a telephone call from the largest branch manager, or the manager of the largest branch in our system. And he said, "I just want you to know you have 90 days. And he hung up. I called him back and I said, "Al, what are you talking about?" He said, "Well, you have 90 days, then you become one of them." And, you know, I have never forgotten that. Here was a guy who had respect for me because I was a pretty good producer in the field and doing some innovative things with managed accounts then. And now I was in the headquarters and I was ostensibly going to provide that same guidance, leadership, an example really to support the folks in the field. But I was now the headquarters guy. And so I was no longer the person who was in the trenches with him. And that's the way I would describe my leadership style, developed over the years, as in the trenches. I would hear that same line again, not too many years later, when I was helping Merrill Lynch build private wealth in the non-US market. That's where it began. And so based on some practice management work that I had done along the way that eventually became a very popular practice management program at Merrill in the late 90s, we now applied that to Merrill Lynch Private Wealth, which would be making the books smaller and raising the minimum. And the person, of course, in charge at the time was the chairman of Merrill Lynch International, Win Smith. And Win came up to me at one point when we were in one of these sessions that we held for advisors from all over the world, and then ultimately ended up traveling in different places in the world. And he pulled me aside one day and he asked me, you know, little old me guy compared to this icon of wealth management. And he said, you know, I've always thought it was a good guide for me to spend about half of my time in the field. What do you think about that? I said, I don't know any other way to operate. I'm actually struck and honored that you would ask me. But that tells you where his head was. So I'd say in the trenches is the way to think about it. And then, of course, that really took shape in the best and worst challenges that I've had. One, I would say the biggest challenge was Phoenix Investment Partners, now Virtus Investment Partners. And that was part of an IPO to demutualization back in 2001. And we ended up catching the wrong end of the curve. That was supposed to be the opportunity, but there was an awful lot of wood to cut in between. So we ended up having to make very, very difficult decisions, and of course ended up making over 7 layoffs, pretty sizable over the course of 6 years. And the way we got through that, again, leaning back on the idea of being in the trenches, there's an awful lot of credibility built up over the time simply by going out, having full transparency, talking to all the associates that could be affected. We were also a public company, so a little tricky to work on that, but we really, really made a lot of progress because the team understood what we were doing. It, of course, did not impact everyone favorably, but they all understood what was going on. Now, fast forward to Fidelity, beginning in 2008, coming right out of the financial crisis. What an interesting place to go. Direct-to-consumer business, one of the largest direct-to-consumer businesses in the United States, just happened to be in financial services. The reason I make that comparison is that it was all about the people. So our net promoter score for our high-value clients at that time, the way they reviewed us, was 6, which I think is as low as it could possibly go. We built back on top of that. We started to understand what people were looking for. We understood they didn't have a majority share of wallet with us. We understood that they were talking to other competitors, and we understood that they were taking money away and giving it to people who in some cases charged a lot more than we did. So the humility associated with those wake-up calls, those messages, and then sharing that around the country. My favorite thing to do would be to go to a branch, sit everybody down and say, well, let's just talk about what's going on. No slides, don't bring anything with you, just a pad of paper. I'd make a diagram of the table, and as people would go around the table introducing themselves, just write their names down, and then I go back around and say, tell me one thing that's really on your mind. And I'd be really surprised if we don't make it all the way around the table, and you'll bring up everything that we're working on or should be working on back at the headquarters. So leadership, just paying attention in the trenches.
First off, great history lesson right there on several things that have influenced your career. I jotted down what you just said: in the trenches, spending time in the field with the people, asking questions, authenticity, transparency, communication. A lot of young emerging leaders tune into this podcast on a monthly basis. How would you describe the most effective communication styles of the most effective leaders that you've had? Is there a particular way that they communicate? Is it you referenced a Q&A kind of mentality? Any advice that you could offer these emerging leaders?
Yeah, it's my particular preference, but I think that you actually establish your quality as a communicator and as a leader within about the first 10 seconds that you're on that stage. Because the people who have been seated into the room, let's go back to my own experience instead of trying to think about what someone else might be able to do. And what I noticed was the most effective forums were the ones where people did not have a lot of orchestration going in. There wasn't it wasn't difficult to get the people there. There wasn't any expectation. There wasn't any formality. It was just the easier they could get into a seat and sit down and then just listen. And that goes a long way. And then the second part is, of course, not to make it too structured, because if it's too structured, then it's too formal. Nobody wants to say anything. Nobody wants to raise their hand. So, what I would try to do, one of these, even the big tent meetings that we would have at Fidelity, we would say, a regional phone center where could be a couple hundred people in the room or more. The first thing to do is to project a casual air. Make sure that it's very easy for you to stand up there. And again, don't bring the orchestrated group of people along with you that are all sitting up there like a murderer's row in a bunch of chairs. That's not really what people want to hear about. They want to hear that somebody is willing to listen. So again, no PowerPoint, no slides, just have the confidence to be able to answer the question. Because if you can't answer a question, that doesn't mean you couldn't keep it all in your head, but it does give you a sense, gives the people in the audience a sense of how engaged you are. So I think it's perfectly fine if there was a question to say, that's an incredibly good question. You know how I know it's a good question? Because I'm not sure I know the answer to that, but I do know who does. And so let's get back to you about that.
Outstanding. So again, as I said in our initial comments, hallmark of your career, you were doing things very early that became tried and true principles of the industry. You have been not just a thought leader, you've been a thought innovator. So what are you working on right now? But more importantly, why are you working on it? What's led you to where you are today, and where you're taking your energy and efforts forward?
A great guy that both of us know, Dr. Chris Hise, said to me once, demography is destiny. And so I've been chasing the baby boomers since actually I am one. So I've been running with the pack for a long time. The baby boomers are this incredible demographic force. It's kind of a human wrecking ball that has changed every institution, every industry that I can think of. You know, when I went to elementary school, there were a ton of them. Go back to that same town today, and almost all of them have been turned into condos. It's a totally, totally different view of that group as it's moved through this entire life history, changing every industry along the way. And so what's the most recent manifestation? What's the big deal? We just hit the tipping point where more than half of the advice industry clients are now of retirement age. So that's baby boomer driven. The boomers are 3 times the size of their parents' generation. So whatever's important that they do becomes important to everybody at 3 times the rate. And now that's called retirement. So right now, retirement is an imprecise process at best. This is an industry that has talked about the abstract idea of a retirement long into the future. Well, we're there, and the industry's not. So as much as, and I've been in it along the way, so I think I'm a pretty good observer, and we've talked about it, but we haven't got the precision on it. So right now, with an initiative across the Money Management Institute, Financial Advisor, and the Execution Project, we're running this thing called Next Chapter, and it is to get execution precision out of what otherwise was a very abstract concept of retirement.
You know, I've heard you talk about adoption as the new innovation, and now we're talking about execution right there. Why has the financial services industry struggled so much with this concept of retirement and providing good advisory counsel to clients over the longer term? Is it this amorphous, nebulous construct that we're dealing with?
It's hard to think about this in less than a reality kind of a view that the financial services industry is sort of like that person that you admire that seems to be naturally thin or naturally athletic or just naturally in good health. And that's because of the markets. So, you know, we can't say that the financial services industry is really that successful if we were to remove the market, right? So, you know, and as you and I have grown up in the business, you know, when I entered financial services in 1980, the Dow Jones was 800. Now, you could do an awful lot of things wrong along the way, and somewhere between 800 on the Dow and 29,000 where it peaked out, you know, there's an awful lot of sins that can be hidden by that kind of growth. And I don't think that it's so much that the industry is not good or not innovative or, you know, it's not a bad things. It's just that it's been spoiled, frankly, by incredibly supportive, with a couple of bumps, incredibly supportive basic enterprise of the economy that has been a blowout success since I was born in 1960. And then certainly these markets that have followed along with it. So I don't think it's about being good or bad or even innovative or not innovative. I haven't really needed to be. Would you agree?
No, I do agree. And so now we're at this great inflection point. As you mentioned, over half of the clientele are of retirement age. The assets that are with that, very, very significant. But, you know, again, as you and I have talked about in the past, the financial services industry tends to focus somewhat myopically on the asset management side of the equation for clients. And some of the challenges, as a matter of fact, many of the challenges that clients are facing right now aren't totally driven on the asset management decision. And you're involved in a couple of initiatives there, one particularly focused on healthcare that is pretty innovative. Talk to us a little bit about wealth care planning and what's going on there.
Exactly. I mean, it's again, lead with the demography, understand what's happening. And as people get older, like me, then they start thinking about other things. And so, or different priorities. And asset management can only get you so far. The vast majority of Americans do not consider their healthcare when they are weaving in their financial solutions. Most financial service companies and advisors really don't have any easy ways to be able to bring the conversation of health into the discussion about wealth. Most people don't think they're that wealthy anyway. And again, health is the biggest concern because it really determines your ability to do all the kinds of things you want to do. There is a big difference between a healthy retirement and a non-healthy retirement. There's a big difference between successful longevity and just longevity. So longevity without quality is nobody's objective. So being able to have very frank conversations and determine whether or not you've got the right prioritization of your investments and your savings to be able to do what you really want to do also means what you can do. And that's really what integrating health is all about. So, but again, you got to get the conversation started. So what some colleagues of mine and I have done is to find ways to get the advisors in a better position to have simpler conversations with their clients, frankly, make it easier for the clients to have the conversations with the advisors who the clients suspect probably don't want to talk about these topics. So, because they haven't so far. So this is really just trying to bring people together. And that's what wealth care planning is. It's not really planning. It's much more about engagement and having those good conversations. Short, simple, and then also not requiring any specialized information, just so that the advisor and the client can start having some kind of rapport as they tackle these topics together. That's kind of the big picture.
So as we think through the industry, let's go back pre-pandemic, a lot of changes were afoot in the financial services industry. Many of those technologically driven, the ability or concern that many advisors have that their value as an advisor is somehow going to be diminished by the continued rise of technology interface with clients and their ability to do things. But, as I sit here and listen to you, what you're doing with wealth care planning, it really is about the conversation. It goes back to something we talked about on leadership, communication, the willingness to engage people, to ask questions of them. I'm just like you. I don't think clients are unwilling to answer the questions. I think that all too often advisors don't have I call it conversational confidence to ask the very simple questions and to get that dialogue started. So do you see it the same way?
Oh, I do for sure. So, we've been down this road before, and certainly nobody understands better how to communicate, understand, learn, train about these issues more than you with what you've done over the years with the incredible success of Canon. It's been to help people, advisors in particular, feel more confident. But then also with your team, it's not only made them more confident from the perspective of the actual information that they possess, that knowledge, but it's also the way they approach. So again, you could have the right kind of knowledge, but you wouldn't have necessarily the confidence of the delivery to engage in the conversation. And because all of this stuff is new and everyone is different and their health is different, each one of these things might as well be a brand new conversation. So most of the innovation that's taken place, if you want to call it that, in this environment, and some of it, to your point also, is sped up by the pandemic because, again, whenever there's a stress or crisis, it does drive activity that was underway and then makes it move faster. I think we're all actually doing more work than we were doing before because we've cut out a lot of the travel and a lot of the other stuff that wasn't really necessary now that we look back on it. So I think a lot of what's been happening so far has been acceleration of things that drive scale. So the reduction in costs. So you can buy beta for free. You can get trades for free. These are market scale and market size plays to be able to acquire more share without necessarily being any better. Now what we're going to see is that machines have a limit to what they can do. But I really do believe, and I learned this at Fidelity, I really do believe that the way to prioritize is to make sure that we are working to get the machines as busy as possible first before we look at what humans do, and not the other way around. We will not innovate as long as we're asking people to do things, and then when they find something that they think is boring, well, let's find some kind of machinery that can do that. I don't think that's the way to do it. I think try to figure out everything, just assume everything can be done by machine, help clients and advisors adopt that, back to your point, adoption is the new innovation. If you could get the machines fully functioning and running as much as possible, then the humans are completely relieved to do the stuff that the machines cannot do. And those are actually pretty simple things, but they're human things and they're important things. And that's where the margin is. So the acceleration can continue on that side, but I think all it does is highlight even more clearly the work that is benefited by what you all do and what we're trying to do in our own way and the various initiatives I'm in, which is to reinforce the value of that advisor.
As I think through your comment about getting machines as engaged and utilized as possible, I go back to the CPA community when Lotus 123 was introduced. There was a great concern that software tools like that were going to replace CPAs. There are more CPAs doing higher quality work today than there was when that was introduced. The CFP world was concerned when a lot of the financial planning tool suites came out that somehow CFPs were going to be replaced. There are more CFPs today engaged in higher quality work. How do we effectively communicate and motivate financial advisors who are sitting there right now concerned about being replaced? How do we continue to share that vision of what can be?
Well, I think it has to start with what do you really want to have be your future if you are an advisor? And here I'm going to say something that I'm sure is not politically correct, but on the other hand, it's been a few minutes and I think I've been okay so far. So why not? Most of the challenges that I see with innovation and especially adoption around the financial advisor community is singular. It is this notion that there is one kind of financial advisor, that we should all attempt to become wealth managers, where when I got in the business, all we had was stockbrokers. And then there was managed account consultants. And then there were financial planners, and it all continued to move. And I think what we have to do is to stop the idea that there is an ideal kind of a person, just like there is in any other role. I mean, there are different kinds of doctors, different kinds of lawyers, even different kinds of accountants. They specialize in different groups of people, different affinity groups, different kinds of solutions. And I think we have to realize that the financial advice industry is a mature consumer business that has room for lots and lots of different kinds of people. And there can be different sorting of clients based on who they are, what they want to accomplish, how much money they have, even gender, even ethnicity. So I think advisors can be very successful if they work with a certain demographic and they can power away on some of the ideas that they have for retirement planning that are specific to the needs of those people, even the amount of money they have, and that just might be different. Because I don't think the person who is really good at connecting with people who are, let's say, participants in a 401k plan or sort of more modest savers, I don't think that there's anything better or worse about those people inherently than someone who is a wealth manager in a family office where the clients have a minimum of $100 million. I just think there's plenty of room for respect and the approach to supporting the professional aspirations and development of each of those different groups of people. And, it is actually that's an awful lot of the essence of the authenticity of what Canon does as well, to put it back on you.
Well, there's a lot of runway, as you point out, for any type of advisor, whether he or she wants to concentrate in certain areas or not. So great perspective there. Steve, we always wrap these interviews with the same question. There's always a different answer. Yours will be unique, I'm sure, as well. If you could go back, knowing what you know now, given the body of work and experiences that you've had, if you could go back and have a conversation, a coaching conversation, a mentoring conversation with a 22-year-old Steve Gresham, what advice, what counsel would you offer that young man?
Oh, wow. I didn't see that one coming. I wish you had warned me about that one. Because I'm not a person who looks back. I don't use the words woulda, shoulda, coulda. Actually would have said, leave your money in the market and don't try to time it. That would have saved me a
Great
over the years. Yikes. That would be very important. But I think and maybe meet your wife earlier, that my father would have said that too. So, I think that the thing that I would have liked to have figured out a little bit earlier, perhaps, is that the patience associated with a game plan really needs to play itself out. Because I think of sometimes the best successes that I've had, it was because I was a driver and I was pushing really hard. Now, again, I don't think those are mutually exclusive, being able to be with the people working in the trenches, as we talked about. But I think I would have understood better that there are some kinds of transitions that just take inherently a really long time. And I learned that in my last two corporate experiences with Phoenix Investment Partners and with Fidelity. I mean, we stayed the course in both of those instances. And it really wasn't until almost the end that we understood that the previous 6 years, or in the Fidelity case, 7 years, was really worth it. And that's what I could have told you from the beginning. I've had that conversation with CEOs since I left my corporate job at Fidelity. And I've talked to them about what's realistic about time horizon. And an awful lot of them just don't see how long some of this stuff actually takes in order to do it right, to do it well, to bring the organization along and make it stick.
Great observation right there. The term that I have heard used before that describes what you've just talked about is persistent patience. It's being persistent in the pursuit of the goal and objective, but having the patience. And sometimes that's it feels that it's at odds in what we're trying to accomplish. But you have certainly been an example of persistent patience, of innovation, of clarity, of authenticity, of genuineness. And I just, on behalf of all the listeners to the Cannon Curve, Steve, I want to thank you for being part of this today.
All right, Phil, thank you. Thanks for all you do for the industry.
Right back at you, my friend.
All right.
Wow. Steve Gresham reeks of authenticity, of innovation, of the principle of execution. He is an example of persistence, of patience, clarity, and genuineness. Steve has been doing things throughout his career from early on that eventually became tried and true. He is full of insight and perspectives on effective leadership principles and communication, the importance of adoption and execution in the industry. I think we've all learned something from Steve's narrative and character in this episode. The industry is lucky to have had him and feel his impact. I want to thank each of you for listening to The Cannon Curve. If you've not done so already, we ask you to please rate the show on iTunes. 5 stars is the best that you can rate. For additional resources, please go to Cannon's website at www.cannon, that's Cannon with 2 N's, CANNON, financial.com. Again, if you've not done so already, please connect with me via LinkedIn and Twitter. The Cannon Curve is a production of Cannon Financial Institute. Executive producer of The Cannon Curve is Sarah Jones. Editing and mixing is done by Dan Mansky. Until next month, I'm your host, Phil Buchanan, thanking you for staying ahead of the curve.